The systematic murder of 6 million Jews during the Holocaust is something many know of, but what most don't know is the history behind how and why they were slaughtered. Jews have lived in Europe for thousands of years, but what made the Nazis try and murder all of them thousands of years later? Well, as it turns out, Hitler wasn't the first to try and exterminate the Jews, but just the worst and most recent.
To understand why Hitler tried to exterminate all of the Jews in Europe, we need to take a look at the Jewish culture, population, and immigration in Europe. To help us learn more about this topic, Clinical Assistant Professor at the Loyola Marymount University Jewish Studies program, Dr. Margaret Feinstein, is here to discuss.
In general, Jews in Western Europe were treated a bit better than Jews in Eastern Europe. And part of that is because the Jews in Western Europe were more assimilated. They had, adopted the same dress, the same language as the people around them, whereas Jews in Eastern Europe tended to be less assimilated. I mean, you did have groups in the cities who considered themselves Polish or Slovakian or something like that. But for the most part, there were a lot of traditional Jews living in small towns and villages who considered themselves ethnically Jewish as well as religiously. And so they spoke Yiddish at home. And if they spoke Polish, it might be with an accent. And so in Western Europe, the assimilation coincided with sort of a more general acceptance by the wider population, whereas in Eastern Europe, there really was a sense that the Jews were different and there was more anti-Semitism.
As an educator and docent here at the Memorial, I find these two panels extremely important because this panel tells you how many years in Europe Jews lived, and it goes through each different nation. And they lived there, and they worked there, and they went to school there, and they served in the army, and they were the seamstresses, and they were the shoemakers, and they were the mayors, and they were the journalists, they were the soldiers. They had every profession. And the Jews usually were, most of the time, are not dregs in society. Maybe they believe in helping their community, and if somebody's having a hard time, the Jews will chip in, their neighbor will chip in, their family will chip in to help them survive. But what is so poignant is, after all these years living in these nations, it only took from 6 years between 1939 and 1945 for the governments, their neighbors, their clients, their patients, the armies of Europe, of the Nazis, to turn on them. And this panel shows how many were murdered in this time period. Okay, so Hungary, 200,000 Jews were murdered, even though they lived there and they were good citizens for 1,900 years.
Pre-war Poland had around 3,300,000 Jews, and of those, nearly 3 million were killed. So 2,950,000 Polish Jews were killed in the Holocaust. Germany had fewer Jews. And this is something that I think is ironic, that in Germany, Jews were less than 1% of the population in 1933. There were only around 560,000 German Jews. Of those who were left behind, approximately 138,000 died in the Holocaust. Survivors of the Holocaust were not treated particularly well. And this came into a real shock to the survivors Many of them, while they were in the concentration camps, had imagined that after liberation, the world would just sort of embrace them, would recognize how wrong anti-Semitism was, would help them get their lives back on track. And instead, countries did not want to admit Jews as new immigrants. And many of them, especially from Eastern Europe, when they went home, they encountered anti-Semitism still. And there were people who had taken possession of their family business or their family home who didn't want to give it back. And sometimes that resulted in those returning survivors being murdered. It's estimated that about 1,300 Jewish survivors of the Holocaust were murdered in Poland after the war.
Unfortunately for the Jews of Europe, the Holocaust left a permanent dent in their communities, one that they're still recovering from today. The Jewish communities around Europe have faced discrimination for thousands of years, and while Hitler may have bent them, they are coming back stronger than ever.